A very warm welcome back to your latest industry recap. Aircraft problems to continue until 2030. Flair Airlines making changes to its network and Boeing not allowed to increase production. Why not begin there, where the American plane maker has been informed that 737 MAX production will not be allowed to ramp up despite significant investments in turnaround efforts. When a door blowout incident occurred at the beginning of the 2024 calendar year, further problems with the Boeing operation were revealed, and the biggest takeaway was the lack of care in maintaining high quality levels. As a result, the Federal Aviation Administration had actually been criticized for its lackluster effort and focus on Boeing and its aircraft production. Onlookers argue that the FAA's leniency and close ties with the American plane maker, which allowed it to have a fantastic relationship, meant that Boeing was basically able to certify its own planes, leading to complacency and the evolution of safety issues. Now, the Transportation Secretary in Sean Duffy has provided updates on the continued oversight and plan moving forward, spelling the news that Boeing doesn't want to hear. Duffy reaffirmed a stance that was already publicized. The Federal Aviation Administration does not feel the cap on the 737 MAX's production rates can be lifted, given the company's current status and, importantly, broken trust. Duffy used the word trust a lot when speaking to Fox News. While there have been jumps in the plane maker's work to really rebuild the trust, it isn't something that's restored overnight, especially when you have so many occasions where they have broken the trust, and the FAA is very much aware that a lot of work still needs to be done. The lack of trust between Boeing and its customers isn't just within the aviation industry, it stretches far more profoundly and personally to the world, especially on the American people, who used to have a lot of pride in this company, but that has certainly fallen off a cliff. Across the last decade, the pride surrounding the plane maker has dissipated at rates not previously really seen or thought possible. On each occasion, the plane maker confirmed it was on the right track, but new issues would continue emerging, showing that the intensity of the turnaround was clearly not being taken seriously. It's the job of all involved, from the government's transportation sector to Boeing's reshuffled leadership and more parties, to make sure that the turnaround efforts can be effective. While Boeing is facing financial hurt from the MAX production caps, it last year admitted that the greater focus needed to be on the basics, and agreed with the Federal Aviation Administration that any production increase would negate really the work being undertaken to ensure that things are put right. 2025 is earmarked as a year of rebuilding. However, nearly 4 months into the calendar year, the plane maker has had issues getting news on when production caps will be lifted. The FAA remains hell-bent on keeping these imposed, and Boeing is hurting financially with the MAX, which is still the most important plane it has. Furthermore, the knock-on effect to airline customers cannot be understated. Major reshuffles are required to combat delays, which are unfolding and obviously worsening with each month. Boeing must continue investing in turnaround efforts, from work on the production floor to practices at upper management, and building a culture that does prioritize safety. It's easier said than done, I know, but if the plane maker cannot do these things, the company's status will never change. Ultimately, 2025 has to be the year in which the turnaround is prioritized, and no further quality slip-ups occur. If Boeing can achieve this, and only if it can, it'll be well on its way to a stronger 2026 and positioning itself for persistent production increases, permitting supply chains. Over to the next story. Flair Airlines has confirmed the cancellation of some flights to the United States this summer, amid political tensions and also other challenges. Notably, the Canadian carrier is no longer serving Nashville. Therefore, as the communications director confirmed, there is an absence in this part of the country. For Nashville, and especially Tennessee, this change represents a loss in capacity in the tens of thousands, which is frustrating, but it's the one of Flair Airlines driving that decision. Unfortunately, the changes have been persistently focused on the political tensions between the United States and Canada over the last 3 months. For Flair Airlines and even Nashville, these tensions remain ever present, and it makes it challenging to get a network really marketable and have people wanting to fly these services. It absolutely doesn't mean that Nashville and Tennessee doesn't have spots that are worth visiting, but marketing the services is something Flair Airlines says they've struggled with. While it is not expected that this will forever be a problem, it is undoubtedly affecting their performance on transborder routes. Other cancellations are expected expected to occur on a temporary basis from several Canadian cities through to those in the United States, and those flights are originating in the likes of Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. Data has already indicated that the bookings for some of the airline's American network have actually dropped quite considerably. Whether driven by political tensions or not, it does mean change is required. Low-cost carriers are always ones that struggle to crack specific markets and must adjust their networks continuously. Unfortunately, there always remains more significant pressures in countries like Canada to stay profitable and sustainable in the long term, and while political tensions have absolutely been publicly mentioned as a key catalyst for route changes and the uncertainty this brings, struggles at the Canadian company have been well documented. It is an unforgiving industry that takes no prisoners, and in a scene that is dominated by Air Canada, the market is very challenging for other airlines to break into, let alone to have a sustainable long-term future, and that's not even me considering the fact that they're a low-cost unit. Over to the final story, where aircraft woes have been plaguing our aviation industry, but Air India expects this to continue for the remainder of the decade, where in fresh comments from the airline CEO Campbell Wilson, discussions centered around the struggles the Indian flag carrier is facing in renewing its business because of these woes. From engine complications that have grounded fleet types right around the world, to persistent supply chain issues and even internal certification challenges, plane makers have had it tough, and their airline customers have felt the direct knock-on effects. Those knock-on effects change in intensity from airline to airline, as each customer will face a different set of circumstances, and their requirement for a sheer amount of new commercial planes will vary. Unfortunately, Air India finds itself amid a significant turnaround to make it one of the industry's leaders again after a turbulent last decade that saw the flag carrier's downfall. Now, under new ownership and really free from the shackles imposed by the government, the belief is that through significant investment, Air India can rebuild and be a force to be reckoned with in a country that is growing its presence right around the world. However, Wilson, who has been tasked with the head leadership position, knows that the situation at the plane makers is complicating their growth and renewal plans. Wilson argues that what makes matters worse is the lack of ways to really sort these complications out. Air India is simply subject to what these plane makers are feeling and experiencing. This means it's unable to take aircraft on when intended to do so. As the reality sinks in that the complications are expected to continue for the next 4 or 5 years, countermeasures are being undertaken to limit the impact. For example, Air India is retaining some of its older gen planes longer than expected to avoid losing capacity during one of its most important periods, which will define the future of the business. However, even though the airline can retain some of its older aircraft, this rarely presents the most optimal solution and will have a negative financial impact. After all, these planes would have typically been axed from the active fleet in an ideal world, but have been retained to preserve capacity. The retained aircraft are older, require more maintenance, and are more expensive to fly. For these factors alone, retaining these older planes is going against everything the new Air India is attempting to champion. However, with its hands basically tied behind its back, well, the situations taking place at plane makers are out of its control, and it can really only manage the card it has been dealt. It does mean a lot of those next generation wide-body but also single-aisle planes have been delayed in their delivery, but Air India says it's managing. Keen to hear your take down below in the comments. Thank you very much for your support here on the channel. It certainly does mean a lot. Please take care, do be safe, and I will see you tomorrow for your next industry recap.
And we'll fly.